The village of Raventon was a quiet, peaceful place nestled between dense forests and towering mountains. The locals spoke in hushed tones about a place deep within the woods, a place where no one dared venture after sundown, the Whispering Woods. Legends said the forest was cursed, a haunted land where the souls of the damned were trapped, their voices carried on the wind. No one knew the true story behind it, but they all agreed on one thing: the woods were not to be entered after dark. Zarmina was new to Raventon. A city girl with a passion for nature photography, she had moved to the village hoping to capture the untouched beauty of the surrounding wilderness. Ignoring the locals' warnings, she ventured into the Whispering Woods one late afternoon, determined to get a perfect shot of the sunset over the treeline. As she entered the woods, the atmosphere immediately changed. The air felt heavy, and the once distant birdsong had ceased. The silence was unsettling. Tall, ancient trees loomed over her, their branches like skeletal hands reaching for the sky. The ground was thick with fog, and the deeper she went, the darker it became, as if the sun itself was afraid to penetrate the dense canopy. Zarmina stopped to snap a few photos of the eerie, mist-covered forest. But as she raised her camera, she heard it, a faint whisper. Zarmina. She froze. Her heart pounded in her chest as she glanced around. The wind stirred the leaves slightly, but there was no one else around. It had to be her imagination. She shook her head and continued walking, telling herself it was just the wind. But the whisper came again. Zarmina. This time it was louder, closer, and undeniably real. Panic began to creep in. She picked up her pace, glancing nervously over her shoulder. The forest around her seemed to close in, the trees growing taller and the shadows deeper. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw something. A figure, cloaked in darkness, standing between the trees. Zarmina's breath caught in her throat. The figure was tall, unnaturally so, with long, bony arms and a face hidden in shadow. It didn't move, but she could feel its eyes on her, watching. She turned and ran, her feet pounding against the soft earth, but the whispers followed her. Zarmina, come back. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears, and her lungs burned as she raced through the woods. The forest seemed endless, the trees blending together in a nightmarish blur. She glanced back, but the figure was gone. The whispering, however, persisted. Stay with us, forever. The voice was different now, more than one. It was as if dozens of voices were whispering in unison, each one more desperate than the last. Zarmina stumbled and fell, scraping her hands against the rough bark of a fallen tree. Her camera slipped from her grasp and shattered on the ground, but she didn't care. She scrambled to her feet, her only thought to escape. Just as she thought she was free, the whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. She slowed her pace, confusion setting in. Had she imagined it all? Was her mind playing tricks on her? She was close to the edge of the woods now, the village just beyond the trees. But then she saw it. Standing directly in her path, blocking her way out, was the figure. Its face, now visible in the dim light, was twisted and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to glow with an unnatural light. Its mouth stretched into an impossibly wide grin, filled with sharp, jagged teeth. Stay with us, it hissed. Zarmina screamed and bolted in the opposite direction, but no matter how fast she ran, the figure was always there, waiting for her, blocking her path. The forest seemed to shift around her, paths closing off and new ones opening, leading her deeper and deeper into the heart of the Whispering Woods. And then, just when she thought all hope was lost, she stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center was an old, crumbling well. The whispers were louder now, coming from within the well itself, echoing up from the darkness below. Without warning, something cold and invisible wrapped around her ankle, yanking her toward the well. She screamed, clawing at the ground, trying to pull herself free, but the grip was too strong. Her body slid across the dirt, inching closer and closer to the edge. As she looked into the well, she saw faces. Pale, ghostly faces of those who had been lost to the woods, their mouths moving silently as they called to her. Their eyes were hollow, just like the figures, and their hands reached out, desperate to drag her down with them. With one final, desperate effort, Zarmina managed to break free and sprinted toward the village. She burst from the woods, her clothes torn and her skin covered in cuts and bruises. The locals found her near the edge of the trees, trembling and incoherent. She never spoke of what happened that day. No one needed her to, the fear in her eyes told them everything they needed to know. From that day on, Zarmina never returned to the woods. She moved away from Raventon, leaving behind her photography and her dreams of capturing the wild beauty of nature. But the whispers never left her. At night, in the stillness of her new home, she could still hear them, faint but unmistakable. Zarmina, come back. No matter how far she ran, the whispering woods would always be with her. And deep down, she knew that one day, she would return. Because the forest always called back its own.